Things that are smart, and things that are stupid are stupid. Sometimes a stupid thing can very convincingly pretend to be smart. This strategy proves to be very effective in the video game industry because video games have significantly lower standards for writing than any other medium. It's easy to exceed your audience's expectations when the bar is set right around here. Still, some games really do earn the coveted big boy status through a consistent creative vision, meaningful exploration of themes and ideas, and earnest desire to say something. I think that evaluating a story purely by its smartness is very reductive. More often than not, said smartness exists purely aesthetically. It's vague hand-waving towards concepts that are recognized to be big and important. Games with truly great writing aren't driven by vast knowledges of science, sociology, politics, or whatever else is considered to be a difficult topic to understand. As any great art, they're driven by characters and their emotional truths. Disco Elysium isn't celebrated just because of its elaborate world building or political analysis. It's celebrated because of its characters and the feelings they elicit. Pity, sadness, admiration, pity, hate, pity, love, confusion, pity. Still, the aesthetics of intellectualism tend to be much more coveted among gamers. Look at Hideo Kojima's output. Metal Gear Solid is put on a pedestal, Death Stranding is laughed at. People will say that it's because of the stilted dialogue, the lore dumps, the silly one-liners and such. But those have always been present in Kojima's writing.
Psycho Mantis.
What's really changed is that Death Stranding left the tangles of political intricacies and went all in on the emotional, interpersonal. It tells its story with deep sincerity, a sincerity that's, quite frankly, terrifying for people who are desperate to have their hobby be taken seriously. Because perception is everything. The needle has shifted in the recent years, but still, for a lot of people, admitting love for video games is outright embarrassing. This insecurity is very deeply embedded in the gaming culture. The Game Awards invite cinema people like Timothée Chalamet or Aaron Paul to host their show because they want to be perceived like cinema with all of its prestige. For some people, this insecurity makes the perception a goal unto itself, a be-all end-all aspect to be achieved above anything else. The rest doesn't matter. Not the story, not the gameplay, not the vision. It just has to look highbrow at immediate glance. And those games are celebrated. They're placed on the same level, if not above, the industry's greatest projects, by critics and by audiences. But if you dig beyond the initial impression, you'd very quickly realize that it's nothing more than sleight of hand, a trick of pseudo-intellectual babble that conceals the fact that the game doesn't even remotely understand those coveted big boy topics. This is a video about BioShock Infinite. Rational Games' BioShock Infinite released in 2013 to universal acclaim and commercial success. If you take the ecstatic critics of yore at their word, BioShock tells probably the best story in a video game. A cerebral, transcendental experience to forever change the entire medium. But if you look at it today, you will be at best confused, at worst outright offended. Infinite stumbles through its themes of religion, quantum physics, xenophobia, and racism with all the grace of a 3-month-old puppy trying to tell its head from its ass. Its most coherent part is its central thesis, one so baffling that I struggle to understand how it flew under the radar, even at the particularly naive moment in history during which the game came out. Set in the early 20th century, the game takes place in the flying city of Columbia, a microcosm of everything wrong with Confederate USA. It's a town built by religious fundamentalists on the backs of black people, fundamentally driven by oppression and hatred. In theory, it's a premise ripe for meaningful commentary on Jim Crow America, exploration of the cruelties of segregation, and a demonstration of how the echoes of that era are still very present today. And they are still very present today. Racial prejudice is deeply ingrained into the US's DNA. It hasn't gone anywhere, despite what some people might tell you, it just manifests in less obvious ways. For a moment, Infinite pretends that that's where it's going, but only for a short moment. In the meantime, the game bombards you with various religious imagery without going into any detail as to how Columbia's church functions, what's the hierarchy, why and how the city's leader Zachary Comstock became a messianic figure for the people, and the role of Christianity in the city's life on the most basic level. The story expects mutual understanding from its audience. Everyone recognizes that the things shown are for some reason bad, not very good at all even. But it isn't really interested in the how or why of the matter, and as such betrays a lack of understanding on a topic it expects you to know things about by default. You, Booker DeWitt, are sent into the city to rescue Elizabeth, a girl with the ability to tear time and space. The way this ability manifests in gameplay is that she can occasionally summon stuff like turrets, cover, a medkit, or a puddle. Elizabeth has been the central part of the game's marketing and its main gimmick, a fully realized companion character with her own behavior, thoughts, and interactions with the world. The concept proved successful. Elizabeth has quickly become a community darling / mascot. Because if gamers love anything, it's uwu kawaii girls of dubious age. As an actual written character, Elizabeth is the best one in the game, but that's like saying that a cardboard cutout of a person has more character to it than a stick figure drawn on a crumpled piece of paper with a couple of traits listed on the bottom. She has a character arc where she moves from isolated child to disillusioned girl to omnipotent god, but those stages, of course, don't come gradually. It's more like a tumbler switches every few hours or so. Elizabeth exists almost exclusively through her relationship with Booker and vice versa. There's next to no internality to either of them. It's even worse with Booker though, because due to interdimensional mumbo jumbo, he's suffering from severe amnesia and mostly exists to provide value judgments about the world around him. At the end of Act 1, it is revealed that Booker is a veteran of the Wounded Knee Massacre. A particularly successful veteran at that, as is Comstock. This is revealed at the local war museum entitled Hall of Heroes, and where the game tackles American jingoism and xenophobia. Hall of Heroes is just a collection of caricatures of Native American people and Asian people. And once again, that's all that it is. No real story is being told to you here, not environmental or regular. It's just presented as matter of fact. It's there. You could argue that it exists for the functional purpose of establishing Booker's backstory, but it's glossed over in such a rushed way that it feels like the game doesn't want you to dwell on it too long. So then, what's the actual purpose? What is it telling you? Racism is bad, war is bad, ethnic cleansings are also very bad. It's decoration you pass by in a few minutes. There's a pervasive feeling throughout the whole game that it never wants you to stop and look at the things around you. Everything is surface level, a still image of phenomena presented simply because it can be, and it has to be. Columbia's citizens don't even pretend to be anything more than automatons. Stay and watch them run out their voice lines and they just keep flailing in one place, forever frozen in the instant they were designed to exist in. It's a hollow carcass of a place through and through for reasons that we'll get to later. Act 2 is where the game's central thesis reveals itself. There's a revolution happening in Columbia now. And get this, the revolutionaries are just as bad as the founders of the city. The game doesn't expressly state that people fighting against racism are bad, but that the oppositional organization Vox Populi is bad. But it doesn't really help that they're led by the only named black character in the game, who also happens to be a sadistic maniac aiming to eat your children. The majority of Act 2 will be spent going through various scenes from the Revolution and listening to Mr. Ethnic Cleansing's Booker DeWitt scoff at them.
These folk need a better class of hero. When it comes down to it, the only difference between Comstock and Fitzroy is how you spell their name.
These guys and Comstock are worth each other, he says without batting an eye, and Elizabeth just solemnly accepts it.
They're just right for each other, aren't they?
Who?
Fitzroy and Comstock.
That these guys are just as bad as these guys.
Everything's changing. People don't know their place anymore.
Tell me about it. An Oriental stopped me on the street and asked me for the time. Just like that.
There should be a law.
I think there is.
What further compounds this issue is the fact that where the founder's sins are merely implied, Voxes are actively shown. They're the ones we watch slaughter innocent people and set babies on fire for the majority of the game's runtime. Don't get me wrong, the government gets a few major fuck-ups that are shown in the game, but none of them are as much as acknowledged by Booker. On the contrary even, you actively get to choose to participate in a lynching, within the first hour of the game even. Murder institutionalized people en masse. Just generally murder people scot-free en masse. Fight some ghosts. Wait, that's not... So ostensibly, Infinite does bother to portray the everyone part in its everyone sucks statement, but only technically. The revolutionaries are still your penultimate obstacle in the game. They're the ones who keep preventing your escape. They're the ones blackmailing you into doing their dirty work and staying in the city, and they're the ones setting the city on fire. And they are technically the final boss of the game. About an hour before the finale, Comstock just pieces out and quietly accepts his death for reasons that we'll talk about in a moment. Equal screen time wouldn't have really remedied the core issue though. Practically speaking, BioShock Infinite is a video game about how black people fighting against their oppressors really fucking suck for doing so. And personally, I find this disagreeable. The story that the game attempts to tell is one of dangers of action, your typical roller coaster thrill ride about how it's better to not shake the metaphorical boat of society, flawed as it may be. And in a sense, this game is a blessing, because of how far it goes to show the sheer shallowness of that argument. You see, you don't get rid of segregation by wishing on a star and hoping really hard. It takes real, observable, well historically documented socio-political action. It is much easier to sell this kind of story in a modern setting. Life is nice for some people. It's not perfect, but it's overall a good time for some people. Why take the chance at something else and risk losing that comfort? What more is there even to want? Better things aren't worth it, even if they're possible at all, so sit down, eat your cereal, and march on like a good moral person. It is much harder to sell this idea in the context of systemic racial oppression, isn't it? Now, you might ask yourself, A, why would someone make this game this way? And B, how did this fly by the audiences? And the answer to both of these is, nobody cared. The reality is that the context, the setting, the historical basis of Infinite are entirely immaterial. They're not real. They're abstracts, aesthetical markers, and window dressing for another regurgitated thesis on how scary political action is. For all it's worth, the game could have been set in World War II Soviet Union and tell the exact same story, beat for beat, without losing anything. It's not about racism. It wasn't ever really. And I don't think that Ken Levine, the game's head writer and creative, is actively racist. It's just that race and racial oppression don't exist as real, tangible things for him. Much like his primary audience of white dudes in the age bracket of 15 to 40, he doesn't understand how or why racism exists and how it manifests. He just knows it's an important topic that immediately gives his story credibility and makes it look like it's for adults. Die-hard fans of BioShock Infinite will tell you that it's a deeply thought-provoking game, one to shake a person to their very core. A specific point of praise is the game's twist ending. It is revealed that through parallel universe shenanigans, Booker and Comstock are the same person. Two sides of the same coin, a snake eating its own tail and generating misery for everyone around them. Thus, the game presents its core thesis. Everybody fucking sucks. There's actually zero difference between good and bad things, you imbecile. You fucking moron. But it's not a thought-provoking idea. In a backwards way, it's a comforting idea, one that reaffirms audiences' pre-existing understanding of the world around them. It sucks. It's unfair. It's unjust. And that's the reality of the situation. There's nothing to be done about it, nothing that wouldn't be destructive at least, and nothing to believe in. In fact, believing in nothing is the morally superior, nobler option. So you shouldn't believe in anything, you shouldn't hope for anything, and above all else, you shouldn't do anything.
Name shouldn't take my side.
He's Zachary Comstock. He's Booker DeWitt.
No. I'm both.
Infinite's development is a particularly infamous one. To say that the project was ill-conceived is to say nothing. Reeling from the success of BioShock 1, publisher 2K gave Ken Levine a total carte blanche to do whatever his heart desired, and didn't leave the man any supervision whatsoever. What happened next were 4 years of grueling, endless pre-production. The team had ballooned multiple times its size, and those people were sent straight into the mines to make content that never had any chance of making it into the game. Infinite was refusing to coalesce because Ken wouldn't let it. He couldn't settle on a single aspect of the game, not its setting, not its aesthetics, core gameplay, characters, story, all had the equal foundational strength of fucking quicksand. The vortex was somewhat slowed down with the release of the first trailer, after which the team had to commit to certain aspects, but it still didn't stop Levine's carnal desire for iteration. Not one idea of his could be left unconsidered, and those considerations and their subsequent dismissal would cost Irrational months of finished work. According to Jason Schreier, the game didn't even have a playable demo or anything of the sort as late as 1 year before its release date. The reason I'm bringing this up is that I have to ask, was it even worth it? Levine was so severely burnt out by the whole process that he shut down the studio shortly after the game's release, despite its absolute commercial success. Not to suggest that he was the one working the most though. Of course, the entire staff of Irrational Games was putting in absurd hours, had to miss out on precious time with their families, with their friends, had to neglect their health, their living conditions, their social lives, their very self in order to develop this game. And at the end of it all, their reward was the end of their career. And almost none of that grueling work gets to shine in the end product. It's a horrid Frankenstein's monster of different bits and chunks of a video game awkwardly stitched together and ready to burst at the seams at any second. Even the game's biggest champions tend to recognize that Infinite's gameplay was entirely compromised. It barely manages to do half the things its predecessors did, and fails to deliver anything beyond that. There's a reason I didn't bring up the gameplay throughout this entire video. There almost isn't anything to talk about. You walk, you shoot, you occasionally collect money and food from trash cans. It's as basic as it gets. You will have mastered it and seen everything it has to offer in the first half hour, and then it goes on for another 12 hours. The whole thing feels like a fever dream to me, one where Ken Levine and the better part of the gaming community successfully managed to trick themselves into seeing this game as something it is not. I don't think Infinite was conceived for any other reason than it had to be. Infinite exists unto itself. It's a vanity project that was always conceived as a monument to its own grandeur. Ken Levine didn't even try to tell a coherent story or build a coherent game because of the absolute certainty he and his audience had of his infallibility. Ken's the kind of guy who considers himself above the very medium he owes his entire career to, seeing himself as the adult who shows up in the kid's sandbox and finally does something real. And then he reaches out his hand and offers you to enjoy that sense of superiority along with him. All of Infinite's ideas, all of its successes and failures, all of its ambitions, everything is preserved in the digital canvas of Columbia. What once stood as a sign of the future, a breakthrough title to shift video games as a whole in a brand new direction, is now a walking, talking cautionary tale of the price of unchecked ambition and ego. So, okay, what now? From the ashes of Irrational Games rose Ghost Story Games, a studio of 15 Irrational Games veterans and Ken Levine at the helm, developing their next ambitious project. This new project is Judas, which is, if you look at it and think about it for more than 3 seconds, is very obviously just another iteration of BioShock. Except this time, there's even less supervision because the studio is so small after all. Judas has been in development for around a decade now, and the end is nowhere near in sight. It's up in the air if the game even does come out ever. And what is this new ambitious project about? It's a story about a revolution happening in a society isolated on a vessel. Levine's newest ambition is to make a game of narrative Legos, practically speaking, a non-linear game. If you're familiar enough with video games, you would know that these have existed since forever, both in 2D, isometric, and 3D form. What I'm presuming is that Ken wants to achieve the impossible kind of non-linearity, unique routes for practically every decision you make, creating what he calls infinite replayability. Of course, in practice, this idea is about as plausible as making a GTA game that lets you walk into any building and contains the entire globe. Again, according to Jason Schreier, the culture at the studio has remained largely the same. It's endless cycles of iteration, dismissed work, shouting matches, and the game simply refusing to coalesce. Ostensibly, Ghost Story comes from a place of passion and desire for innovation. But I think that this new studio is a remnant of a bygone era. As its name suggests, it's a ghost refusing to move on to the next life because it still has unfinished business or something. It can't even sustain its own form. Most of Ghost Story's original employees have since abandoned ship for one reason or another. Just like Infinite, Judas isn't really a project of passion or a profound desire to create something. It exists unto itself, because it can and because it has to. Because if it doesn't exist, if you're not making it, then what the hell do you even do? But I mean BioShock 1 now that's a decent game.
She's a on to the spotlight. I'm on to get spotlight. She's a on, a good spotlight.